Hello, my friend, and welcome to this study. I have something special for you today. So if you'd like to relax with some music or history and tales of the wonderful and weird, and adventurous, then come with me to the world of the turn of the century, around 1900, where we've already seen together in the study how the imagination was being sparked and expressed in new and intriguing ways, how artistic as well as political movements influenced culture, and how culture influenced national movements and political leanings as well. How the Industrial Revolution's coming of age changed humanity in profound ways that found expression in, among other things, literature, illustration, art, and music. It was a time full of contrasts, beauty and monstrosity, man and machine, fantasy and fact. I have here this small sheet I've printed out, as I've found this for sale online somewhere, and I thought the image was intriguing. It's from someone's personal autograph book, and it's autographed, firstly, 21st of October 1879 in London, and there's some music here, and the dedication to Mademoiselle Mary, and it looks like Warren, possibly, and the name Edouard Marlois or Malruy. Marlois, it depends on how they were pronouncing it in London. This is a very little known composer. He was born in 1847 in France. He was a noted repetiteur to singers, as well as director of music at Adelphi and Covent Garden Theatre. He composed for the voice, for piano, and a few small instrumental pieces. He died on the 21st of January, 1881. There's nothing terribly remarkable about this, except that we know that he moved in the circle of composers who were known not to have received the Impressionists well, notably Debussy and Stravinsky, and also Dandy. Yet, this circle of musicians were forging their own new ground. The interesting thing about this is one of these musicians has signed his name down at the bottom. 6th of December 1879 in London, Londres. And here we see Camille Saint-Saëns, recognizable signature, along with a few bars. So we know exactly what those bars are as soon as I looked at them. We've got the key of E flat and this lovely opening melody to his third piano concerto. Now, by forging new ground, the third piano concerto is perhaps an excellent example of Saint-Saëns' way of doing it. He was the first Frenchman to write concertos in France for the piano. He was a masterful orchestrator. He made use of every instrument to its best qualities. He could weave this tapestry of texture with the orchestra, with a giant orchestra, with modern instruments, and make it sound almost simple and sublime, yet using this huge orchestration. The third piano concerto indeed begins with the piano, but not with this statement of a 3-bar melody. The piano is a background instrument. Saint-Saëns himself was a virtuoso pianist and organist, and you can see that although this is an accompaniment, it is no mean feat of the fingers on the keyboard. It is, however, the background as the horn comes in with this enchanting melody as the solo instrument. Just a solo horn answered by the clarinet. And then, by some strings, little by little, building, just with some sustained chords, in pianissimo, very quiet. And as the arpeggios build in the piano, we have the horn and flute, and only a few chords sustained by the strings until it builds and builds into the texture of a true symphonic concerto. This is part of the genius of Saint-Saëns, whose weird and wonderful world of turn of the century it is into which we shall delve. Here we can see in Saint-Saëns' Six Études, his first part, the prelude, is dedicated to Edouard Marouin, the French virtuoso musician Camille Saint-Saëns, a composer who might not have been as prominent on the programs, but one who has always been present throughout my life, at times as a novel inspiration, a quiet impression, magical intrigue, or tumultuous discovery and achievement. From plain masterfully written Samson and Delilah on the grand piano of my childhood, to my rediscovery of his symphonies and piano concertos during a solo trip to Melbourne. From my days at conservatory to being in the audience at concerts and soirees, through my passions and explorations of music from the Renaissance to the present, Saint-Saëns' music has been a constant presence, and today we'll share that together. I shall copy out one of these fine beautifully unassuming, eloquently unadorned statements from Saint-Saëns' Fourth Piano Concerto on this staff paper, as we learn about the man, his life and work. Camille Saint-Saëns was born in Paris on the 9th of October, 1835. His father, an official in the Ministry of the Interior, died within a few months of Camille's birth, so he grew up as an only child with his mother Clémence and his great-aunt Charlotte Masson. Early on, he exhibited an extraordinary gift as polymath, encompassing music, art, natural sciences, mathematics, and foreign languages. This precocious child was already translating texts from Latin and Greek at the age of 7, as well as solving algebraic and physics assignments with ease. He took music instruction from his great-aunt, a trained pianist, and was already composing his first pieces in 1839. He was able to sight-read demanding scores and exhibited a phenomenal memory. However, Camille's was a sheltered childhood, and he had little social contact outside the home, becoming somewhat aloof with few friends. He made his first public appearance as a pianist in May 1846 in the Paris Salle Pleyel, where he played Mozart's Piano Concerto in B-flat major, Köchel 450, and Beethoven's Piano Concerto No. 3 in C minor, Opus 37. 2 years later, he entered the famous Paris Conservatoire to study as a pianist, organist, and composer. As with many famous figures who recede from the spotlight, rumors circulated around Saint-Saëns and his private life. Saint-Saëns was nearly 40 when he married 19-year-old Marie-Laure Truffaut, the sister of one of his pupils. His mother, however, with whom he lived, disapproved and contributed to making the marriage difficult. The couple produced 2 sons, but when André, the eldest, was 2, he fell out of a window tragically and died just 6 weeks later, having contracted pneumonia. The younger Jean-François also died, aged 6 months, a double blow that would destroy the marriage. In July 1878, Saint-Saëns and Marie went on holiday, and on the 28th of July, he left their hotel room and disappeared from the marriage. Though they never divorced, they never communicated again. Saint-Saëns would later form a curious bond with his friend and teacher, Gabriel Fauré, and his wife and children, possibly imagining the family he might have had circumstances permitted. As a composer, Saint-Saëns was a romanticist, classically trained and inclined, and though his music throughout his long life retains these classic forms, his symphonic poems, among other compositions, are innovative and intriguingly genius, making use of the great orchestras of the Romantic age with complex, layered textures and the sublime use of solo instruments. His description of Debussy's works as being without form, and his tone poems were akin to Liszt, might have put him on a radical side of the complex dispute that was the Wagnerians versus the Brahmsians. Saint-Saëns, however, was never one to choose sides. He achieved some of his finest orchestral writing in a relatively new genre that linked short orchestral work to narratives. The tone poem. His Le Rouet d'Omphale, 1871, Phaeton, 1873, Danse Macabre, 1874, and La Jeunesse d'Hercule, 1877, each take as their subject matter someone who breaks the rules or is on the fringes of society. Hercules, notably dressed as a woman serving Omphale by spinning. Phaeton, who is unable to control the chariot of the sun. Death, raising the dead to the dance. And the child, Hercules, choosing the path of struggle and combat rather than that of ease. Saint-Saëns was the first French composer to write piano concertos, and his symphonies, while not departing from tradition, forged new paths in musical form. which we can hear in his Organ Symphony Third, which is triumphal and emotion invoking. His chamber music influenced France's new composers, Fauré and Ravel. Though he profited from Liszt's influence to a degree, he was suspicious of Wagnerian mythos that had seemed to surround those operas, and use of orchestra and harmony. And, after France's defeat in the Franco-Prussian War in 1870, Saint-Saëns sent his endeavours towards French nationalism. In 1871, he founded the Société Nationale de Musique to aid the production and popularization of all serious works by French composers, along with Romain Bissine, professor at the Paris Conservatoire, and its newest members, which included Dupas, Fauré, César Franck, and Massenet. In 1886, however, when César Franck's supporters, led by Dandy, voted for the inclusion of foreign works in its programs, Saint-Saëns left the society, balancing between radicalism and conservatism in his art. His dislike of Impressionism gradually became outspoken, the nebulousness of its expression and perception opposing his desire for clarity, balance, and form. Adding to his criticism of Debussy, he declared Stravinsky insane after hearing The Rite of Spring. He did have a difficult and controversial existence with opera, theatre politics, war, and cultural inclinations often being at odds with Saint-Saëns' creative endeavours, though his opera Samson and Delilah seems to be his best work of the genre. But many of his operas are not fully performed or well understood until the advent of recording brought them into the spotlight more. In his personal life, Saint-Saëns was always very private and inclined to disappear for days or even weeks. However, this enigmatic figure that he was also known to have been a lavish host, entertaining in his Paris apartment. Of the several unsubstantiated stories that circulate about him, his performances in drag seem to capture the imagination, such as one source noting his appearance as Marguerite from Gounod's Faust. Paul, the son of Pauline Viardot, described one of his mother's soirees where Saint-Saëns sang the jewel song from Gounod's Faust, dressed as Marguerite. One story, however, does seem to hold some truth. Saint-Saëns first met Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky during his concert tour of Moscow in November 1875, and the two composers struck an immediate rapport. Quite apart from his musical mastery and, as noted, his ability to combine the grace and elegance of the French school with the seriousness and depth of the great German composers, Tchaikovsky was drawn to Saint-Saëns for his briskness, wit, and originality. Of Saint-Saëns' first visit to Russia, Tchaikovsky's brother Modeste recounted the following. It turned out that the two friends had many likes and dislikes in common, both in the the sphere of music and in the other arts too. In particular, not only had they both been enthusiastic about ballet in their youth, but they were also able to pull off splendid imitations of ballerinas. And so on one occasion at the conservatory in Moscow, seeking to flaunt their artistry before one another, they performed a whole short ballet on the stage of the conservatory's auditorium, Galatea and Pygmalion. The 40-year-old Saint-Saëns was Galatea, and interpreted with exceptional conscientiousness the role, whilst the 35-year-old Tchaikovsky took on the role of Pygmalion. Nikolai Rubinstein, the younger brother of Anton, stood in for the orchestra on the piano. Unfortunately, apart from the three performers, no one else was present in the auditorium during this curious production. Following the breakdown of Saint-Saëns' marriage, he became a compulsive traveller, visiting every continent except Australia and Antarctica, making 179 trips to 27 countries. Concert tours took him to Germany, England, and the United States, as well as to Spain, Portugal, Italy, Scandinavia, Greece, Russia, South America, Sri Lanka, or Ceylon at the time, and the Canary Islands. But it was in North Africa that Saint-Saëns found his home. Saint-Saëns first visited North Africa in 1873 and immediately found a musical theme that he incorporated years later into his suites algériennes. But beyond its rich musical culture, there was a magic about Algeria, Tunisia, and Egypt that captured his imagination. Here, he could walk the streets anonymously, something that was not possible in Europe, so much so that he had used the pseudonym Charles Saint-Laurent. Boarding a ship in Marseille, he would revel in finding himself 24 hours later in Algiers, with its sun, greenery, flowers, and life. His fifth piano concerto, known as the Egyptian, written in 1896, with its gorgeous and evocative slow movement, is based on a traditional Nile boatman's song, though the pentatonic melody that briefly takes its place also alludes to his journey from Port Said to Saigon in 1895. Saint-Saëns' prodigious intellectual gifts never ceased to produce creative results, such as his African-themed works. Notably his African concerto, as well as the Egyptian number 5 we mentioned earlier, written in Luxor and containing his most exotic music. Being a gifted linguist as well, Saint-Saëns would write literature and poetry, and publish articles about acoustics, in addition to pursuing interests in geology, botany, astronomy, natural history, and mathematics, and often corresponding on specialist subjects with some of Europe's leading scientists. At the end of 1921, the 86-year-old Saint-Saëns gave a well-received recital in Paris, and then left as usual for his annual winter hivernal in Algeria. But on the 16th of December that year, not long after arriving in his beloved North Africa, he suffered an unexpected heart attack and died in Algiers. His body was repatriated, and he was given a state funeral in the Church of the Madeleine. Saint-Saëns had composed more than 300 works in almost all genres, only about 24 of which are currently firmly established in the consort or academic repertoire. About half of his oeuvre consists of such almost completely forgotten vocal works as choruses, cantatas and songs with piano accompaniment. Of the oratorios, only the Oratorio de Noël, opus 12, written in 1858, is still performed, and of his stage works, only occasionally Samson et Delilah, which was composed in 1877. Although Saint-Saëns asserted that he had done his best in his altogether 14 operas, perhaps, sadly, his most known works are those he cared little for, The Carnival of the Animals and Danse Macabre, which do not begin to scratch the surface of the musical genius that was Camille Saint-Saëns. Saint-Saëns was indeed a paradoxical character, and his career reflected this. He was a central figure in a period from which he often held himself aloof, not entirely aligning himself with the subjectivism of 19th and early 20th century Romanticism, that which still fuels our fascination with emotionally embattled composers. He was still able to express his feelings and emotions and evoke those of his audience. It's one of the things I love about his fourth piano concerto that we've been writing out here. Not terribly proficiently, with a few mistakes, but we've got this huge orchestra in the third movement, and near the middle of the third movement, the tumult, the building up, ceases with a few tutti chords by the orchestra. As the piano and everything builds, and we have these almost cadential chords, except they introduce a very bare, exposed melody, almost simple in its execution. One note at a time, one note only, for the right hand of the piano, with no other accompaniment than the pizzicato of the strings. A very simple, eloquent statement that's soon taken up by more and more of the orchestra, and it develops slowly into an expression of great complexity and masterful articulation. I would play more of Saint-Saëns for you, but it is not the type of music given to ASMR, as it evokes so much feeling and emotion. And though there are some sublime, almost dreamy sequences, they're always leading to very charged, exciting, and very energetic music. How far Saint-Saëns might have succeeded in keeping private emotions out of his music is debatable, because throughout all of these gorgeous works there is always the prevailing sense of some expression that is very deeply personal. Like many great artists, Saint-Saëns was a complex figure, a man of paradoxes and contradictions. Though a classicist in temperament, the Romantic era in which he lived fostered suspicion in him, even if stylistically his music was influenced by its currents. He was a pioneer of symphonic and chamber music, an international sensation in his own lifetime, with an insatiable lust for travel and an erudite interest in diverse fields. In addition, his career as one of the most outstanding pianists and composer of his day, Saint-Saëns wrote poetry, plays, and criticism, edited Baroque music, namely Rameau, and published scholarly articles on astronomy. For many years after his death, only a fraction of Saint-Saëns' music was regularly heard in concert. His most popular work, Le Carnaval des Animaux, was written for private performance in 1886, but withheld from publication during his lifetime, apart from Le Cygne, the Swan, his third organ symphony, some of his concertos, Danse Macabre, and Samson et Delilah, the second of his 13 operas, formed until recently the chief works of his that were regularly performed. But now you know a little more about the man behind these works, and more works that went in to making this gorgeous music by Camille Saint-Saëns. this journey into the weird and wonderful, marvelous world of Camille Saint-Saëns. I hope it has relaxed you and given you some pleasure and some beautiful things to dream about. Be good to yourself, my friend. Be kind to others.